My name is Mike Samples. I'm a financial analyst on the Multicare account in Tacoma, Washington, and this is my adventure. It was bad enough doing this while things were level, but eventually a steep uphill climb got introduced into this exercise. So, having to clip in and out of a rope line, having to climb a steep side of the mountain wearing nothing but crampons to dig into snow, having to balance an ice axe, and have to also be cognizant of the amount of slack you had in your rope line as you're still roped up to two other people. I'm looking up and thinking, I don't know if I can do this. But eventually, one foot went in front of the other, and allowing the crampons to support my full body weight, literally sticking to the side of this mountain, I found a way. And after going through 3 or 4 of these rope lines, realizing we'd gotten to the end of the last one was one of the best feelings I think I've ever had. I smiled, the pit in my stomach closed up, and I think I realized at this point I'd probably gotten through the hardest part of this trip. Not long after this exercise, the sun began to come up. Watching it come up over the clouds, over the cloud line, and start to light up all of this area that we'd been climbing all night long was just magnificent. Easily the most spectacular sunrise I've ever seen in my life. Looking down was just amazing with things coming into view, and it made me realize, if I had any question as to why I decided to do this, seeing the sunrise and seeing a view that so few people have ever gotten to see in their lives, that answered it. At this point we were sitting at about 13,000 feet, and we took our final break. Had about 10 minutes to just take this in, but the 10 minutes went by quickly and it was time to put the packs on and make the last part of the trip up the mountain. Our lead guide Emily did say the worst was over and we should be at the summit in about an hour. Because of the distance between everybody with the rope line, it was real easy to just get lost in your thoughts. There wasn't a lot of conversation. It was just one foot in front of the other. And I think I probably lost pretty good track of how far up the mountain we were, because just looking down at my feet, taking one step, before I knew it, my friend Neil, who was a part of the front rope team, his voice came up and just basically said, "Guys, we made it." Then we climbed the last part of the last hill, and I suddenly found myself staring down into the snow-covered crater of Mount Rainier. As I climbed down into the crater, everything hit me. All those months of stair training, all those weekend hikes, every step of this longest overnight hike I'd ever been on had culminated in this. And I choked up a little bit. Caught myself quickly, but definitely choked up. Our group found a flat portion in the crater, dropped our packs, and unhooked out of our rope lines. Hugs, congratulations, and photos ensued, along with a well-earned shot of Maker's Mark. About 15 minutes later, Buck, who had been significantly slower than us on this trip, came into view and came into the crater, to a round of applause from all of us. At that point, the 7 of us friends who had taken this trip together decided to make the trip across the crater up to Columbia Crest, which is the true summit of Mount Rainier, probably another 150, 200 feet up from the crater. We were exhausted, but we also knew that if we didn't do this, we'd kick ourselves for it after we got off the mountain. So we eventually made it, took pictures, enjoyed the view, and then realized it was time to turn around and start the trip back down. So we walked across the crater to go get our things and prepare for the trip down. There was one other thing that we noticed, and it was just not only that the sun was shining, but there was absolutely no wind to speak of. All of the talk of the wind and how tough that was going to be turned out to be nothing. And that evening, after we'd returned, Emily basically told us that the weather we had for that climb was probably the best weather she'd had for any climb she'd done so far that year. So it just kind of let us know how lucky we were. The trip down was amazing in its own right, as we got to completely see all the terrain we'd climbed up in the dark, and it was just stunning. The carabiner exercise going down was significantly easier than it was going up, even when I could see what the drop-off was. You know, everything was lit up at this point and just wasn't as scary as it was going up. The one tough thing on the going down portion, though, was the fact that the banging of my toes against the front of these double plastic boots we were wearing definitely took its toll. About the last 2.5 miles before we got back to Paradise, I had to slow down a little more than everybody else because every step was just painful. The good news for me, though, was that the rest of our group was pretty wiped out too, and I think they only got to Paradise about 10 minutes before I did. So when I got there, we took some pictures, was able to assess the damage to my toes, and they'll be having to get themselves fixed up for months here. And then we just waited on Buck, and then we got in the vans and headed back to Ashford. And on the ride down, I just looked out the window, and as we came around a curve, the mountain came back into view. And I realized that just 9 hours prior, I'd been at the top of that mountain. Those memories do come back every time now that I see that mountain in a car, on a train, and it just reminds me of what an amazing trip this was. And I also know that that mountain is a mountain I'll never look at the same way again.